Michael Scotto reports that teams are interested in going after LaMelo Ball. Other NBA execs are eyeing the situation happening here in Charlotte. What does that mean for the Hornets? And yeah, we're going to be having this conversation a lot. We're going to have it today. What do the Hornets do with their star player? Plus plenty more on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. There's Doug Branson, everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can find the subtext information on the show notes that we post every day. You can also find him on Locked On NBA with Hayes and Matt Moore. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. We have a newsletter, the Locked On Hornets Daily Newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. Did you get some drafts ready to go for the low bar that we were working on last episode, Doug? Because that's what I was working on all day yesterday.
I definitely had some drafts yesterday. Thinking about this game against the Minnesota Timberwolves, yeah, I had plenty of drafts. I'm going to have plenty of drafts tonight while I draft up the Every Hornets box score notes.
You know what's interesting? What would be funny is the bottles. You know how everybody loves beer on draft? You could just, every time you order on draft at the low bar, it actually is worse, right? You just, actually doesn't taste very good. It's just another idea.
At some point, the bartender comes and swaps out your beer for a significantly worse beer. Like you get like a nice import, whatever you like, and then somebody comes along and gives you a Busch Light, and that would be the old Mitch Kupchak special, trading the 13th overall selection in a draft for what would be, I think, in the late 20s in the next draft, which would become Nick Smith Jr., who's on the docket for today.
Oh, well, really, it should just be a wild card. Like, you really should just have a 20% chance that you're going to love it. Like, it might be a LaMelo Ball. It might be a Brandon Miller, but you got a 1 in 5 shot. You spin the wheel, and it might land on the greatest draft you've ever had, or most likely it's going to be terrible. That's what it should be at the low bar. Let's hope for the high bar. Let's hope for the high bar. One of the draft picks that the Hornets got right and was quite tasty as a draft selection was LaMelo Ball. When the Hornets lose a bunch of games, and they do so for consecutive seasons, other teams are going to circle this franchise like vultures, trying to pick up what are the only good pieces on this roster. LaMelo still is, objectively at least, a good piece on this roster, and Michael Scotto is taking note. Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype talks about his availability or potential availability. And he says the availability of Hornets guard LaMelo Ball is one of the stars. Several executives who spoke with Hoops Hype will be monitoring the trade on the trade market next summer. Ball was one of several notable All-Star snubs, despite leading East guards in fan voting for the All-Star ballot, and was fourth in scoring when the All-Star reserves were announced. Due to games missed, Ball won't be eligible for an All-NBA selection either. But really, the most important part of that is several executives who spoke with Hoops Hype will be monitoring the trade market situation with LaMelo Ball in particular. It makes sense to me, Doug. What do you make of this report, or maybe even just this write-up? Maybe it doesn't feel like an official report from Scotto, who goes to Hoops Hype and writes about LaMelo.
Yeah, this seems more of a vibes report. It doesn't seem like there's one or two executives that, for sure know, hey, we're going to pursue LaMelo, we're going to make calls on them, or any kind of embedded reporting around Jeff Peterson that would indicate that they are making serious inquiries into the desires for teams. But it wouldn't surprise me if some of those conversations are going to happen this offseason, or if any of those conversations have already happened, because the Hornets have not won a lot of basketball games, and they probably need some kind of roster reset, whether that involves LaMelo Ball or whether it involves the rest of the roster. They need to move this thing in a direction that's more aligned with what Charles Lee wants to institute defensively, in terms of just the overall game plan that Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson, you're already starting to see that with who they've acquired through going through the G League, the trades that they've made. They're starting to reshape this roster slowly. And the question is, will they accelerate that in the offseason by making a big move with LaMelo Ball? Now, is that for assets? Is that for a player? I texted you yesterday. I said, all right, I got a crazy idea. I'm thinking about this, right? Because on Locked On NBA, we just had this discussion. The Grizzlies, the Memphis Grizzlies, have lost 3 straight games, and each of those games in the last 3 seconds. They're sliding back in the Western Conference. They look really vulnerable. The best player on that team is not Ja Morant. It's Jaren Jackson Jr., and Ja Morant has not played up to his level, up to the All-NBA level that we've seen from him previously. He's also dealt with some injuries. I said, man, if they get knocked out of the first round, little Ja Morant, LaMelo Ball swap, is that crazy? Is that insane? And you texted back, yeah, we already talked about that on Wes and Walker. And I'm like, damn it. I have a crazy trade idea, and you've already talked about it.
Yeah, Wes brought it up when it was actually before the 3-game losing skid, but you could see the Grizzlies lose in the first round, and then eventually, just because of the Ja Morant injuries, because his numbers haven't been very good, LaMelo, his numbers have gotten worse, and we know about the lack of availability for him. It's basically change of scenery point guards that have been all-stars before, and then do you bring Ja Morant on home? Although I can't imagine that the LaMelo stands would love him leaving Charlotte, the small market as it is, and then going to the Memphis franchise. Yeah, that way. I don't know if the LaMelo stands would love that. So, yeah, the vibes report, I want to get back to that, just how much substance there is here. There's absolutely substance. We've been talking about it the entire time. And I like Michael Scotto. We've had him on, I think, a couple times. I've talked to him. He's a good dude, man. The thing is, it seems like what you do is you monitor this situation. You see that the Hornets are one of the 2 worst teams in all of basketball. They have an all-star on their roster in LaMelo, who has the star next to his name, at least for one season on his basketball reference page. And, of course, that might be a guy that you trade if you're the Hornets and you collect assets because you're going in complete rebuild mode. So Scotto sees that, calls some of the execs that he knows in whatever franchises, and then he says, hey, what do you think about LaMelo? Oh, yeah, we'll be monitoring that situation. Okay, hang up phone, call the other guy, same thing. We got a report, baby. And that makes sense. Like, it's real. I'm sure other teams are interested in LaMelo. It would make sense for other teams to call about LaMelo. We've gotten actual reports, Doug, that other teams have been interested in LaMelo. It's never the Hornets being interested in dealing LaMelo. It's never that. We've not heard it one time. We've heard all the speculation as soon as LaMelo was drafted by Charlotte saying he doesn't want to be there. He wants to go to a bigger market. We've never heard it from him, his party, his family, maybe LeVar. Maybe LeVar's talked about it. LeVar's talked about LaMelo being out of Charlotte. But other than that, we've never really heard it from LaMelo. So I think this is what is true again. But the more you lose games, the more you're going to have these types of conversations, and the Hornets don't get any benefit of the doubt in terms of keeping their good players, because despite having good players, they still put up 14-win seasons. That's why other NBA teams are calling.
Here's the most interesting graph from this Scotto report, this Scotto vibes check. It's not, you haven't read it yet. This is the most interesting thing to me, at least. Looking ahead, this is what Michael Scotto writes. Looking ahead, Ball wants to start winning.
Yeah.
Thus, is Ball willing to endure more losing and lessen his chances of individual accolades as the Hornets continue rebuilding under the new regime of executive Jeff Peterson and coach Charles Lee? Now, does Scotto have information to indicate that Ball has this feeling of like, hey, I would like to win? I mean, obviously, there's sort of he's a professional basketball player. We've heard, he's a gym rat. He's dedicated to winning. Is that sort of like that overall thing? Or is that like, hey, he wants to win and the Charlotte Hornets are not winning? And I've said before on this show, if I were LaMelo Ball and I had gotten snubbed from the All-Star game, even though I had gotten the most fan votes, the media didn't vote me in, the coaches decided to leave me off the list because my team is terrible. And is that, how much of that's on me and how much of that is on the organization? I've said I think LaMelo Ball should go into Jeff Peterson's office and say, hey, what are we going to do in the offseason to make sure for certain that we win next season? I don't want like, we're second inning of a 9-inning ball game. I want to be in the 9th inning. I'd like to be in the bottom of the ninth where this team is actually contending so that I can get an all-star nod, so that I can get an all-NBA nod. How much does LaMelo Ball care about that? Or does he like playing in Charlotte? Does he like playing for Coach Charles Lee? Like, so much of this is about relationships, and we can talk all day long about, oh, well, the Hornets might want to reset. They might have an opportunity to maximize LaMelo Ball's value. I've said if he gets one more ankle injury, all of a sudden that contract becomes super underwater. All of that might be the case, but also this could turn into a two-way street very easily where relationships break down. You get into see, right now everybody's in the groove. Everybody's playing basketball games. They're trying to win, but they're really like a lot of us that are watching these games, they're focused on just getting through these games and getting into the offseason. That's when everybody takes a step back. And Jeff Peterson and Coach Lee and LaMelo Ball, they all take a step back and start to wonder, like, is this really working? Is this okay? And that's where I think things start to get interesting. And these Scotto vibe checks might turn into Scotto actual reporting.
Well, and the other thing, just real, like, the whole LaMelo wants to win. I think that's more of a because every player wants to win. What's the opposite of that? Well, LaMelo wants to start losing. Well, LaMelo doesn't care as much about winning. I have not seen anything such as LaMelo doesn't necessarily care about winning as much, or player X doesn't necessarily care about winning as much, even if he is comfortable in Charlotte. Of course, LaMelo wants to start winning. We didn't see anything else after that from the Scotto report, vibes check, that we don't know what to call yet.
But the Hornets, and Scotto makes this note, the Hornets have won with LaMelo Ball. They've had a winning record under Borrego with LaMelo Ball. They just got blown out in the play-in. So Ball wants to start winning, to me, is different just semantically than LaMelo Ball wants to win. Every player wants to win, but want to start winning because you have not been winning right now. And how quickly do you want to start winning? And does that align with where the franchise is and the speed that they want to operate under this rebuild, aka how much money do you want to spend on veterans in the offseason to make this a roster that has depth, that can sustain a few injuries, that can actually win? And do you want to go somewhere, not where you can get a higher profile, but just somewhere like De'Aaron Fox wanted to go to San Antonio to be paired with a certain player because he thought this is where I can, like, Sacramento was winning, but this is where I can actually win, get into the playoffs and win series. Does LaMelo Ball all of a sudden start to feel that itch as he sustains more ankle injuries? By the way, he's probably seeing like, oh, I don't know, like I'm a couple ankle injuries away from questioning whether my whole career is in question. So maybe I got to go somewhere sooner rather than later and start winning.
I do think it resets once it's 3 years since you had that winning season. If it's 3 years, I think you could start again, right? Like if it's been 3 years ago, I think we could reset and say, now I want to start winning again.
I wish I could. I wish I could reset for sure.
All right, coming up next. Let's do it. We have that opportunity on a podcast. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
We'll reset for the second segment. We'll talk about NSJ, and there are some other things in the Hoops Hype vibes check. We'll get to that as well coming up next, LOH. Before we get to more of the vibes check, I love saying it. This episode is brought to you by Open Phone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls all day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you missed a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, Open Phone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OpenPhone, openphone.com/LockedOnNBA for 20% off 6 months. openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Few more hoops hype things to bring up here. Not only did Michael Scotto talk about LaMelo Ball, but other players were mentioned in this write-up as well. He says the future of rising center Mark Williams could play a role in answering the questions above about what they do with LaMelo. Of course, we know about Williams being traded. The trade was rescinded. So we know that the Hornets have traded him once before, but that was a lot coming back. I mentioned a million times, it felt like 120 cents on the dollar coming back to the team when you were sending Mark out. Like, are you willing to trade him for equal value? Are you willing to trade him because you just want to move off of him so badly? Like, you think a player a little bit more valuable than the team that's trading him? And then so, I don't know, just what would you get in return, I think is a real question about Mark. And then, of course, Miles Bridges also brought up. He says, lastly, forward Miles Bridges will be a name to watch on the trade market this offseason. And he talked about the 3-year, $75 million contract. Of course, we know it's structured to descend in value each season. So Mark Williams, Miles Bridges, again, not real reporting here, just other names to watch, which we kind of already knew. Doug, we're going to be talking about this every single day going towards the offseason, and we'll see if those names survive at the start of next season.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get anywhere near the value for Mark Williams in this coming offseason than you got at the trade deadline, or you almost had from the Los Angeles Lakers. And part of that has to do with how that trade went down and was rescinded. But part of it is just the trade deadline really accentuates or elevates the value because the Lakers desperately needed a center. And they had these ideas of like, all right, we have Luka, and now it was just circumstance. They wanted to compete right away, and then they reevaluated things and said, all right, I think we're actually good enough with Jackson Hayes. We'll just keep on down the road and then look at that in the summer. But where they could get Mark Williams or some other center for probably less than a first round pick. So I think the value goes down. I think what the Hornets probably do is they don't extend him in the summer. They just say, all right, we're going to roll the dice here, and hopefully you improve, and we can just kick that can down the road to 2026. You'll become a restricted free agent. We'll deal with that. Or if you just go on a tear and the team's not doing well, but you're playing well, then we can reevaluate and maybe put you somewhere where you can be on a winning team at the next trade deadline, and maybe then you could get that first round pick again. So I think that's just the most likely plan at this point.
And we talked a lot about Miles too. We'll see what happens with Miles. He's playing well enough right now, especially after the All-Star break. He's playing just flat out well, being the most consistent guy. So the question is that value that he's building right now, does that go towards the team because they want him, or does that go towards another team because they're just trying to get some assets? He is the oldest player on this team. Do you want some age, which is actually, I would like some more age on this team, just in the form of role players, which is what you're hoping Miles to be. If Brandon is your second best player, LaMelo is your best, this top 3, top 5 pick might be another guy that is a part of your core 3, if we dare explore that territory. So the questions about Miles are going to be here all offseason too.
Yeah, I think he's older. I would like this team to have some age that also comes with some playoff experience and the requisite seriousness that is required from a team, and that can communicate that seriousness to a team. Like, this is how you have to behave on and off the floor to get to the playoffs, to succeed in the playoffs. That's just not something that Miles has because he hasn't played in the postseason.
Right. So one guy that's not very old is Nick Smith Jr. He's had a rough stretch here. He's not been shooting the ball well. That's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to be the spark plug off of the bench, and he's been starting games because they've just been down with injuries. Brandon Miller goes out with the injury, and Nick Smith Jr. has been getting a lot of minutes at that 2-guard spot, playing in the backcourt alongside a LaMelo, or being maybe even the main guy in the backcourt when KJ Simpson has to start some of these games with LaMelo in and out of the lineup. We did see that the Hornets were going to option Nick Smith Jr. down to the G League to play for Greensboro, which certainly that got an eyebrow raise out of me, but that was a clerical error by the Hornets. He is not going down to Greensboro. Instead, Nick Smith Jr. is staying up with Charlotte. So, I don't know about crisis averted there, Doug, but tell me, what would that say to you about bringing NSJ down to Greensboro after getting all of these minutes with the big boy squad? I know you're not necessarily thrilled with what you've seen from him recently. He certainly has been playing well, but are you giving up on NSJ, and where do you think the Hornets are on how they feel about him going forward?
So, look, we had this conversation a little bit yesterday, and then I was perusing the Charlotte Hornets Reddit, and there was some comments that essentially were to the effect of, why is Locked On Hornets giving up on NSJ in year 2? And at the same time, they're saying be patient with Tijan Salon, the rookie who is also young. Nick Smith Jr., almost 21 years old. And I think, what is Tijan now, 19? So, still a couple years difference. But the big difference for me is that Tijan Salon, number one, I think has a higher ceiling than Nick Smith Jr. ever had. But also, number two, Tijan Salon has positional size, has some things physically that he's gifted at that you go, okay, if certain things come together, I can see what this becomes. With Nick Smith Jr., he doesn't have the positional size. So then you're saying the skill has to come through, and it has to come through sooner rather than later. Otherwise, he's unplayable. And so that's where Nick Smith Jr., where I'm I don't know if that I'm all the way off the fence, but I'm pretty close to being off the fence because he's not shooting well. I would say if he gets to his little mid-range push shot, that he's seen some success there, but everything else about his offensive game has not been very good. He's not a playmaker. He's not been a knockdown shooter. I don't know. I don't know what he could do that could then overcome the deficiencies that he has defensively because he lacks size.
Yeah, I mean, look.
So make that make sense to me. Yeah, I'm willing to say, yes, he can become a better version of what he is, but the gulf between where he is now and where he would have to be to play on a decent team. This is where I think we get this wrong. We're evaluating Nick Smith Jr. relative to how the Hornets are performing now. That, to me, that's wrong. You got to evaluate a player based on what would he be if the Hornets were actually trying to compete. And to me, he's not in the rotation.
Yeah, and again, for me, with Nick Smith Jr., it's going to be hard for me to just completely give up and quit on a player in year 2, especially in such a bad situation, because Nick Smith Jr., he's being asked to do a lot more than what you would originally ask him to do, right? You're asking him to shoulder the responsibility in the backcourt for a lot of these shots. He's taking a double-digit amount of field goal attempts per game, which is not exactly what you want to be doing. They've thrown a lot at him in his second year. He actually is only 20 years old coming into this year. I don't know if he turned 21, but Basketball Reference has him.
No, I said he's almost 21. Yes, 20.8.
So he's 20 years old even still. I can understand your point about just wanting to move on and explore something else because you like positional size. It's hard to make it as a small player in the league. If you're not hitting your shots, it's especially hard and maybe even impossible to make it. I go to Devontae Graham, Doug. Devontae Graham, real small player. Luka Doncic had Devontae Graham as the most improved player of the year, that second season in the league for Devontae, when he shoots 37% from three and he scores 18 points per game after the 4 points per game that he scored his rookie year. But it was the three-point shot that was falling for him. Devontae could also play make like hell. You saw him at 7.5 assists per game. Remember, he just didn't turn the ball over very much either. Despite having the basketball in his hands, he had 1.5 turnovers per game the third year, 3 his second. But he wasn't shooting well at all from 2. He was one of the worst 2-point field goal percentage shooters in the entire NBA. And the field goal percentage was 38% from the field that second year, 37, 36, 37. They're terrible numbers. And Nick Smith Jr. is shooting 38 after shooting 39% from the field. It's just not efficient enough. He's not hitting his shots. But Devontae could help you offensively in other ways by passing, by not turning the ball over as much. There's just not enough playmaking. Like, what else? You're right. What are you doing to help the team if you're not hitting shots? I think he's trying defensively. I don't want to give up on him, right? But man, the NBA moves fast. If you're a fan and you demand winning right now, because we've been dealing with losing for so long, from the Bobcats days to this decade that we've been going on without a playoff appearance. I'm ready now, damn it. I want my playoff series. I want my above 500 record. Okay, well then now you might have to give up on Nick Smith Jr. going into next season if you want to win now. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on him as a player, but now what you're saying is we might have to give up on him being a player here. If you demand winning now and NSJ just isn't that guy, then he might just have to go to a different team. That's where the timelines get contradictory with some of the demands of these fans. And I get it. I don't want to give up on a player their second year. But to your point, Doug, is he helping the Hornets win right now despite all this responsibility? Doesn't mean he can't in the future. It just means if you want the Hornets to win next year, it's going to be a monster improvement that he has to make on both ends of the floor. That's tough to do.
Yeah, he has to get on a heater and stay on a heater. I mean, that's, Devontae Graham fell out because he lost the heat. And at his size, you've got to maintain that offensive firepower, or there's not much of a place for you in the league. I commend him for adding some defensive skills. It's just when he did that, all of the things that you wanted from him offensively have fallen away. And there will be, look, Trey Mann is going to be part of this roster again. Do you think they're going, after trading away Cody Martin, they're probably, if they have any idea of competing next season, they're going to reload at the wing again. And so then Nick Smith Jr., who, by the way, was already trying to compete to keep his head above water in the rotation at the beginning of this season. And he got the opportunity. I mean, I think it's a different situation with James Bouknight, because I think there was some off the court stuff and some focus stuff and some just personal stuff that was going on with Bouknight. But it's similar in that Bouknight kept getting these opportunities to show what he could do, and he just unfortunately could not do that.
Yeah, he got the ops. You're right. Yeah, he got the opportunities.
And so Nick Smith Jr. getting the burn here. I mean, you say that he's been given a lot of responsibility, and I say, look, you were a first-round pick, like on a bad team. You're a first-round pick on a bad team.
And a late one. But I
a
hear
late
you.
one, sure. But a first-round pick on a bad team, you should have responsibility, and we should judge you on what you do with that responsibility. And I think that's all that's going on here, particularly when you are a guy that doesn't have positional size. That's the difference between him and Tijon. Where I'm going to let the rope go a little bit on Tijon is because I think if he gets – because I think with Nick Smith Jr., we're not saying – oh, is he going to be a star for the Hornets, or is he going to be a role player? That's not the conversation. That's a conversation we're going to have about Tijon. Can he be a star, or is he going to be a role player, or is he going to completely fall out of rotation? With Nick Smith Jr. right now, it's either he becomes a little bit of a spot role player, or he falls out of the rotation entirely.
Yeah, let's finish that conversation. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
He's everywhere!
Yeah, I have more thoughts on Nick Smith Jr. and Tijon, plus we'll get to the Sicko Satchel questions. Maybe this is the day that we get to the Bobcats question. Who knows? You got to stick around and find out. Last segment, LOH. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Who's in your support system? We all need people to lean on, whether it's friends, family, mentors, professionals. Even the strongest leaders and athletes know that asking for help makes them better. Therapy is one of the best ways to build a strong support system. It's not just for tough times. It helps with setting boundaries, developing coping skills, and becoming the best version of yourself. If you are trying to learn how to ask for help, I've seen firsthand how valuable it is to have a support system that keeps you grounded and motivated. Plus, you get everyday benefits with BetterHelp. Therapy isn't just about the crisis moments. It's a tool for self-improvement, stress management, and navigating life's challenges. Plus, it is convenient and accessible. BetterHelp is fully online, making it easier than ever to connect with a licensed therapist from anywhere. With over 30,000 professionals available, you can find the right fit and switch anytime. at no extra cost. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Finishing thoughts on the Tijon Salon, Nick Smith Jr. thing. Real quickly, so you saw this on Reddit, where we get featured on Reddit every once in a while, but I only go to Reddit when nice things are being written about us, I guess. Like, that's the only thing that I've ever explored Reddit through, which is a nice lens to view our podcast. But I didn't know if this was on Reddit or if this was on the critically acclaimed Every Hornets box score that you read these comments.
No, this is on Reddit.
Okay, Reddit. Thank you. Shout out to Hornets Reddit, man. They're fantastic. Yeah, I think, excuse me, that's a fine. With the distinction between Tijon Salon and Nick Smith Jr., you say NSJ is a first pick, which is true. He is a first-round pick. At the same time, you're talking about a 20-slot difference between these two guys. And in year one, in year two, you're going to give more time to a top 10 pick. That you can't just ride the coattails off being a first-round pick once you get to year 3 or year 4. You can't continue to do that. But the Hornets are going to give Tijon Salon a little more leeway when you're the 6th overall selection. When he was drafted, we don't like using this name because it didn't work out, but it doesn't mean that the timeline wasn't the same. He was on the Kai Jones timeline. When he was drafted, you saw this body, you saw the want to, you saw the shooting potential, and you said, okay, there's just not a bunch of guys that are 6'10", that have the potential shooting that Tijon Salon can bring and the defensive intensity and the possible rebounding. So we're going to take him at 6, even if you can't see it in his first year as an 18, 19-year-old. He might be able to showcase that his second, third year. But like, I actually do believe that Salon is more so on the 3-year timeline. If you don't like drafting a prospect that's raw, that's understandable, completely understandable. But that's what they did, which is another indication that the Hornets told you we're actually not going all in on winning this year, which is something that really should be stated. I don't think it can be overstated. When you draft Salon over other guys like Klingon and depth pieces and college players that were, maybe even 2-year guys, that was another telltale sign that we weren't going to win a whole lot this year. But yeah, I think it's completely different with Nick Smith Jr. and Tijon Salon. But I'm not giving up on both as individual players. It just feels like if it's going to work out with the Hornets, it might just be Salon more so, and NSJ is a bench guy going somewhere else. But it's all about the environment to foster that kind of improvement. Build me the damn environment, and then hopefully everybody works out. That's what I would love. Sicko Satchel time, Doug. What you got for the people?
Schumann of the 22nd Mullins Regiment asks, how would we match up? How would the Hornets match up with our injury lineup? So no LaMelo Ball, no Mark Williams, no Grant Williams, no Trey Mann, no Brandon Miller against the 2012, the infamous 7-59 2012 Charlotte Bobcats, featuring Gerald Henderson as your leading scorer at 15.1 points per game, followed closely by Corey Maggette at 15 points per game. Kemba Walker, 11th in Rookie of the Year voting at 12 points per game in only 25 starts in that season of 66 games played. Actually played the most games of any Bobcat in that season. So that Bobcats team had its fair share of injuries as well. It also featured great names like Corey Higgins, Matt Carroll, Eduardo Nahara, Jamario Moon, Desanya Jop. I could go on if you'd like.
Please don't, actually. You just go ahead and stop right there.
How would they do? How would the injury lineup do against the 2012 Bobcats? They're getting a win.
Doug, why do I feel so comfortable that the 2012 roster would win this game? I feel comfortable.
I don't.
That.
I disagree. I think the injury lineup. Look, we could turn this discussion in a lot of different directions. I think one direction that's easy is the era discussion. Like that, this team, even at its most injured, is more fit. Can run up and down the floor probably better than that 2012 Bobcats team. That 2012 team does have Bismack Biyombo and Tyrese Thomas, so maybe they're more physical inside. But I'm still giving it to the injured. Roster.
I feel that I feel very good about the 2012 Bobcats, the 7-win team. That's right. I feel good about that 7-win team getting the victory. On one hand, you have young version, but you still have Kemba Walker on this squad. So the guards that you'd be starting on the 2012 Bobcats team, Kemba Walker played for that squad. So Kemba Walker already is going to be an upgrade. You have some of these other guys where Bismack Biyombo, we know Bismack, we know him well. He was in the NBA for a long time. He did play some winning basketball with Toronto, so I can go ahead and just give you a series that got him the $16 million a year contract or whatever it was. Gerald Henderson, at least another team wanted him. Gerald Henderson played well enough that year. Corey Maggette, NBA vet, didn't go well here, but it didn't go well in Charlotte in a lot of different cases. We got to figure out who the injured starting lineup is, though, right? Is it KJ Simpson and Nick Smith Jr.? Is that your starting backup for this, or is that your starting backcourt for this team? Because automatically that's a loser. Like, they're not better than Kemba and Gerald Henderson.
No, but you have Miles Bridges, who's going to be the best player on the floor amongst all of them. Look, let me give you some numbers here, okay?
Okay.
Offensive rating of the 2012 Bobcats was 95.2.
Oh, it's terrible.
They didn't even eclipse 100 offensive rating, though I think the Hornets, even at their most injured, might do that. So they would certainly be higher than 95, I think. The three-point attempt rate, I think it's what I had.
Well, yeah, okay, style of basketball, right? Like style of basketball.
So that's what I'm saying. 43% for the Hornets right now, 16.9% three-point attempt rate. So you're going to get more shots up. You can't really shoot, but you're going to get more shots up. If you get Miles Bridges on a heater, I think he scores 40 points in this game, and they don't easily win, but I think they win.
Out of all the things you just said, Miles was the best point. That's the one I can understand. But the getting more shots up after we just talked about Nick Smith Jr. going 0 of 8 and KJ Simpson being your starting point guard, like that is not anything that scares me. And then you get to the front court.
I don't know. KJ's had a couple of games. I think KJ would get up for this. He would be weirded out by the time travel that would be involved, but I think once he got past that, I think he would get up for this game. I like this. That's what I'm saying. Like, are we facing the 2012 Bobcats at right after the 7-59 season? Because that team was about as demoralized as a team has ever been in NBA history. So if the Hornets get that team, then I think, look, you've got some guys in KJ and Musa who are fighting for they're playing in the present. They're fighting for their current NBA lives. I think they're going to beat, your DJ Whites. With all respect to Lord Byron Mullins, they're going to beat the Matt Carrolls, the Derek Browns of the world, the Reggie Williams of the world. They're going to get offensive rebounds. They're going to get some easy points. They're going to get out into the break, and they're going to knock down just a few more three-point shots, and it's a math game at that point, and they win. I'm going to say final score 105-90.
Oh, no, you already got it wrong. No team is getting to 100. Yeah, that's crazy. No team is getting to 100. This team, we had as a bullet point, the Hornets broke 100 when they played Golden State. That was so significant for this team that you put it up as a bullet point when we broke the century mark, which the Bobcats don't do it either. In fact, my favorite stat, because when I was looking up the 3-game losing streak numbers and comparing that to the 2012 Bobcats, Doug, do you know how many times the Bobcats got to 100 points that year? I think they got there. Go ahead.
I'm going to say 7.
I think it was. I think it was either that or like 11. I think you nailed it. Yes. It was. I believe it was single digits that they actually got. I believe it was 7 times that they scored 100 points. So no, there is no team in this battle that's getting to 100 points. It can't even be this current version. Me saying that the 2012 version is going to win, they're not going to get to 100 points. My big question too, though, coaching matchup. How do we feel about Charles Lee versus stuff you in a locker, Paul Silas? Is there any intimidation factor? Does Charles Lee run away with his tail between his legs because Paul Silas is giving him the mean mug?
No. Okay. Charles Lee's cool, calm, and collected. He's not getting – I haven't seen him get intimidated except by Joe Mazzulla, but that's because Joe Mazzulla said he didn't want to be his friend anymore and is an absolute psychopath. I don't think there's a man alive that wouldn't be intimidated slightly or at least off-put.
You're right,
by
because
Joe Mazzulla.
You're right because Paul Silas passed away. R.I.P. Joe Mazzulla needs a Paul Silas across the other end on the same side of the court. I need Joe's shenanigans to stop with a Paul Silas figure just willing to give. You're not going to give me the crazy eyes, Joe. Okay, you're going to shake my hand. We're going to do this respectfully, and we can talk after the game. Anyways, what a sick
Here's why they
this
break
is.
100. I'm going to give you why they break 100 because net rating for this Bobcats team was minus 15. That's incredible. It's incredible to be a minus 15 net rating, offense to defense, in a year. They were dead last in defensive rating. They were awful. And then here's the X factor, Seth Curry. Seth Curry gets 5 threes in this game, and they coast. I think they coast against the 2012 Bobcats.
Man, the Kemba Walker disrespect, it's tough. Kemba,
we're talking about a very different version of Kemba Walker, like a vastly different version of Kemba Walker pre-Steve Clifford. It's not anything about Kemba Walker. It's about how awful that team was.
Reddit users, I need you to go at Doug for the Kemba Walker disrespect that he's been just uttering disgustingly so on this podcast. Do you want to end it there? Was that a sick enough conversation with me getting coffee?
That's another fine. You're racking up. Where's the phlegm bucket?
God almighty. That was so sick that I need the phlegm bucket. It needs to be a throw up bucket after that conversation. I commend us for that segment. What a brilliant question that was by Suman. That was
Thank you, Suman.
For the Locked On Hornets podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast. I mean, this content can only be free. There is no way that we can charge you for that kind of content. So we appreciate you. We need to pay you to listen to that kind of debate. Everyhornetsboxscore.com. Go check it out. Go check out Locked On NBA. Also listen to me on Wes and Walker, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.
I'll be at the low bar.